This is a continuation of The Hour of the Dragon, also known as Conan the Conqueror, by Robert E. Howard, comprising parts 5 and 6. Part 5. The Haunter of the Pits. Conan lay still, enduring the weight of his chains and the despair of his position, with the stoicism of the wiles that had bred him. He did not move, because the jangle of his chains, when he shifted his body, sounded startlingly loud in the darkness and stillness, and it was his instinct, born of 1,000 wilderness-bred ancestors, not to betray his position in his helplessness. This did not result from a logical reasoning process. He did not lie quiet because he reasoned that the darkness hid lurking dangers that might discover him in his helplessness. Zaltotun had assured him that he was not to be harmed, and Conan believed that it was in the man's interest to preserve him, at least for the time being. But the instincts of the wild were there, that had caused him in his childhood to lie hidden and silent while wild beasts prowled about his covert. Even his keen eyes could not pierce the solid darkness. Yet after a while, after a period of time he had no way of estimating, a faint glow became apparent, a sort of slanting gray beam by which Conan could see, vaguely, the bars of the door at his elbow and even make out the skeleton of the other grille. This puzzled him, until at last he realized the explanation. He was far below ground, in the pits below the palace. Yet, for some reason, a shaft had been constructed from somewhere above. Outside, the moon had risen to a point where its light slanted dimly down the shaft. He reflected that in this manner he could tell the passing of the days and nights. Perhaps the sun, too, would shine down that shaft, though on the other hand, it might be closed by day. Perhaps it was a subtle method of torture, allowing a prisoner but a glimpse of daylight or moonlight. His gaze fell on the broken bones in the farther corner, glimmering dimly. He did not tax his brain with futile speculation as to who the wretch had been and for what reason he had been doomed, but he wondered at the shattered condition of the bones. They had not been broken on a rack. Then, as he looked, another unsavory detail made itself evident. The shin bones were split lengthwise, and there was but one explanation. They had been broken in that manner in order to obtain the marrow. Yet, what creature but man breaks bones for their marrow? Perhaps those remnants were mute evidence of a horrible, cannibalistic feast, of some wretch driven to madness by starvation. Conan wondered if his own bones would be found at some future date, hanging in their rusty chains. He fought down the unreasoning panic of a trapped wolf. The Cimmerian did not curse, scream, weep, or rave as a civilized man might have done. But the pain and turmoil in his bosom were nonetheless fierce. His great limbs quivered with the intensity of his emotions. Somewhere, far to the westward, the Nemedian host was slashing and burning its way through the heart of his kingdom. The small host of the Poetanians could not stand before them. Prospero might be able to hold Tarantia for weeks or months, but eventually, if not relieved, he must surrender to greater numbers. Surely the barons would rally to him against the invaders, but in the meanwhile, he, Conan, must lie helpless in a darkened cell, while others led his spears and fought for his kingdom. The king ground his powerful teeth in red rage. Then he stiffened as outside the farther door he heard a stealthy step. Straining his eyes, he made out a bent, indistinct figure outside the grille. There was a rasp of metal against metal, and he heard the clink of tumblers, as if a key had been turned in the lock. Then the figure moved silently out of his range of vision. Some guard, he supposed, trying the lock. After a while, he heard the sound repeated faintly somewhere farther on, and that was followed by the soft opening of a door, and then a swift scurry of softly shod feet retreated in the distance. Then silence fell again. Conan listened for what seemed a long time, but which could not have been, for the moon still shone down the hidden shaft, but he heard no further sound. He shifted his position at last, and his chains clanked. Then he heard another, lighter footfall, a soft step outside the nearer door, the door through which he had entered the cell. An instant later, a slender figure was etched dimly in the gray light. "King Conan!" a soft voice intoned urgently. "Oh, my lord, are you there?" "Where else?" he answered guardedly, twisting his head about to stare at the apparition. It was a girl who stood grasping the bars with her slender fingers. The dim glow behind her outlined her supple figure through the wisp of silk twisted about her loins and shone vaguely on jeweled breastplates. Her dark eyes gleamed in the shadows, her white limbs glistened softly like alabaster. Her hair was a mass of dark foam, at the burnished luster of which the dim light only hinted. "The keys to your shackles and to the farther door," she whispered, and a slim white hand came through the bars and dropped 3 objects with a clink to the flags beside him. "What game is this?" he demanded. "You speak in the Nemedian tongue, and I have no friends in Nemedia. What deviltry is your master up to now? Has he sent you here to mock me?" "It is no mockery." The girl was trembling violently. Her bracelets and breastplates clinked against the bars she grasped. "I swear by Mitra. I stole the keys from the black jailers. They are the keepers of the pits, and each bears a key which will open only one set of locks. I made them drunk. The one whose head you broke was carried away to a leech, and I could not get his key. But the others I stole. Oh, please do not loiter. Beyond these dungeons lie the pits which are the doors to hell." Somewhat impressed, Conan tried the keys dubiously, expecting to meet only failure and a burst of mocking laughter. But he was galvanized to discover that one, indeed, loosed him of his shackles, fitting not only the lock that held them to the ring, but the locks on his limbs as well. A few seconds later, he stood upright, exulting fiercely in his comparative freedom. A quick stride carried him to the grill, and his fingers closed about a bar and the slender wrist that was pressed against it, imprisoning the owner, who lifted her face bravely to his fierce gaze. "Who are you, girl?" he demanded. "Why do you do this?" "I am only Zenobia," she murmured, with a catch of breathlessness as if in fright. "Only a girl of the King Seraglio." "Unless this is some cursed trick," muttered Conan, "I cannot see why you bring me these keys." She bowed her dark head, and then lifted it and looked full into his suspicious eyes. Tears sparkled like jewels on her long, dark lashes. "I am only a girl of the King Seraglio," she said, with a certain proud humility. "He has never glanced at me, and probably never will. I am less than one of the dogs that gnaw the bones in his banquet hall. But I am no painted toy. I am of flesh and blood. I breathe, hate, fear, rejoice, and love. And I have loved you, King Conan, ever since I saw you riding at the head of your knights along the streets of Belvaris when you visited King Nimed years ago. My heart tugged at its strings to leap from my bosom and fall in the dust of the street under your horse's hoofs." Color flooded her countenance as she spoke, but her dark eyes did not waver. Conan did not at once reply. Wild and passionate and untamed he was, yet any but the most brutish of men must be touched with a certain awe or wonder at the baring of a woman's naked soul. She bent her head then, and pressed her red lips to the fingers that imprisoned her slim wrist. Then she flung up her head as if in sudden recollection of their position, and terror flared in her dark eyes. "Haste!" she whispered urgently. "It is past midnight. You must be gone. But won't they skin you alive for stealing these keys? They'll never know. If the black men remember in the morning who gave them the wine, they will not dare admit the keys were stolen from them while they were drunk. The key that I could not obtain is the one that unlocks this door. You must make your way to freedom through the pits. What awful perils lurk beyond that door, I cannot even guess. But greater danger lurks for you if you remain in this cell. King Tarascus has returned." "What? Tarascus?" "Aye, he has returned in great secrecy, and not long ago he descended into the pits and then came out again, pale and shaking, like a man who had dared a great hazard. I heard him whisper to his squire, Aridaeus, that despite Zaltotun you should die." "What of Zaltotun?" murmured Conan. He felt her shudder. "Do not speak of him," she whispered. "Demons are often summoned by the sound of their names. The slaves say that he lies in his chamber, behind a bolted door, dreaming the dreams of the Black Lotus. I believe that even Tarascus secretly fears him, or he would slay you openly. But he has been in the pits tonight, and what he did there, only Mitra knows. I wonder if that could have been Tarascus who fumbled at my cell door a while ago," muttered Conan. "Here is a dagger," she whispered, pressing something through the bars. His eager fingers closed on an object familiar to their touch. "Go quickly through yonder door, turn to the left, and make your way along the cells until you come to a stone stair. On your life, do not stray from the line of the cells. Climb the stair and open the door at the top. One of the keys will fit it. If it be the will of Mitra, I will await you there." Then she was gone, with a patter of light-slippered feet. Conan shrugged his shoulders and turned toward the farther grill. This might be some diabolical trap planned by Tarascus, but plunging headlong into a snare, was less abhorrent to Conan's temperament than sitting meekly to await his doom. He inspected the weapon the girl had given him and smiled grimly. Whatever else she might be, she was proven by that dagger to be a person of practical intelligence. It was no slender stiletto, selected because of a jeweled hilt or gold guard, fitted only for dainty murder in Milady's boudoir. It was a forthright poniard, a warrior's weapon, broad-bladed, 15 inches in length, tapering to a diamond-sharp point. He grunted with satisfaction. The feel of the hilt cheered him and gave him a glow of confidence. Whatever webs of conspiracy were drawn about him, whatever trickery and treachery ensnared him, this knife was real. The great muscles of his right arm swelled in anticipation of murderous blows. He tried the farther door, fumbling with the keys as he did so. It was not locked. Yet he remembered the black man locking it. That furtive, bent figure, then, had been no jailer seeing that the bolts were in place. He had unlocked the door instead. There was a sinister suggestion about that unlocked door. But Conan did not hesitate. He pushed upon the grill and stepped from the dungeon into the outer darkness. As he had thought, the door did not open into another corridor. The flagged floor stretched away under his feet, and the line of cells ran away to the right and left behind him. But he could not make out the other limits of the place into which he had come. He could see neither the roof nor any other wall. The moonlight filtered into the vastness only through the grills of the cells and was almost lost in the darkness. Less keen eyes than his could scarcely have discerned the dim gray patches that floated before each cell door. Turning to the left, he moved swiftly and noiselessly along the line of dungeons, his bare feet making no sound on the flags. He glanced briefly into each dungeon as he passed it. They were all empty, but locked. In some, he caught the glimmer of naked white bones. These pits were a relic of a grimmer age, constructed long ago when Belverus was a fortress rather than a city. But evidently their more recent use had been more extensive than the world guessed. Ahead of him, presently, he saw the dim outline of a stair sloping sharply upward, and knew it must be the stair he sought. Then he whirled suddenly, crouching in the deep shadows at its foot. Somewhere behind him, something was moving, something bulky and stealthy that padded on feet which were not human feet. He was looking down the long row of cells, before each one of which lay a square of dim gray light that was little more than a patch of less dense darkness. But he saw something moving along these squares. What it was he could not tell, but it was heavy and huge, and yet it moved with more than human ease and swiftness. He glimpsed it as it moved across the squares of gray, then lost it as it merged in the expanses of shadow between. It was uncanny in its stealthy advance, appearing and disappearing like a blur of the vision. He heard the bars rattle as it tried each door in turn. Now it had reached the cell he had so recently quitted, and the door swung open as it tugged. He saw a great bulky shape limned faintly and briefly in the gray doorway, and then the thing had vanished into the dungeon. Sweat beaded Conan's face and hands. Now he knew why Tarascus had come so subtly to his door, and later had fled so swiftly. The king had unlocked his door, and somewhere in these hellish pits had opened a cell or cage that held some grim monstrosity. Now the thing was emerging from the cell, and was again advancing up the corridor, its misshapen head close to the ground. It paid no more heed to the locked doors. It was smelling out his trail. He saw it more plainly now. The gray light limned a giant anthropomorphic body, but vaster of bulk and girth than any man. It went on 2 legs, though it stooped forward, and it was grayish and shaggy, its thick coat shot with silver. Its head was a grisly travesty of the human. Its long arms hung nearly to the ground. Conan knew it at last, understood the meaning of those crushed and broken bones in the dungeon, and recognized the haunter of the pits. It was a gray ape, one of the grisly man-eaters from the forests that wave on the mountainous eastern shores of the Sea of Vilayet. Half mythical and altogether horrible, these apes were the goblins of Hyborian legendary, and were in reality ogres of the natural world, cannibals and murderers of the nighted forests. He knew it scented his presence, for it was coming swiftly now, rolling its barrel-like body rapidly along on its short, mighty bowed legs. He cast a quick glance up the long stair, but knew that the thing would be on his back before he could mount to the distant door. He chose to meet it face to face. Conan stepped out into the nearest square of moonlight, so as to have all the advantage of illumination that he could, for the beast, he knew, could see better than himself in the dark. Instantly the brute saw him. Its great yellow tusks gleamed in the shadows, but it made no sound. Creatures of night and the silence, the gray apes of Vilayet were voiceless. But in its dim, hideous features, which were a bestial travesty of a human face, showed ghastly exultation. Conan stood poised, watching the oncoming monster without a quiver. He knew he must stake his life on one thrust. There would be no chance for another, nor would there be time to strike and spring away. The first blow must kill, and kill instantly, if he hoped to survive that awful grapple. He swept his gaze over the short, squat throat, the hairy swag belly, and the mighty breast, swelling in giant arches like twin shields. It must be the heart. Better to risk the blade being deflected by the heavy ribs than to strike in where a stroke was not instantly fatal. With full realization of the odds, Conan matched his speed of eye and hand, and his muscular power against the brute might and ferocity of the man-eater. He must meet the brute breast to breast, strike a death blow, and then trust to the ruggedness of his frame to survive the instant of manhandling that was certain to be his. As the ape came rolling in on him, swinging wide its terrible arms, he plunged in between them and struck with all his desperate power. He felt the blade sink to the hilt in the hairy breast, and instantly, releasing it, he ducked his head and bunched his whole body into one compact mass of knotted muscles. And as he did so, he grasped the closing arms and drove his knee fiercely into the monster's belly, bracing himself against that crushing grapple. For one dizzy instant, he felt as if he were being dismembered in the grip of an earthquake. Then suddenly he was free, sprawling on the floor, and the monster was gasping out its life beneath him, its red eyes turned upward, the hilt of the poniard quivering in its breast. His desperate stab had gone home. Conan was panting as if after long conflict, trembling in every limb. Some of his joints felt as if they had been dislocated, and blood dripped from scratches on his skin where the monster's talons had ripped. His muscles and tendons had been savagely wrenched and twisted. If the beast had lived a second longer, it would surely have dismembered him. But the Cimmerian's mighty strength had resisted. For the fleeting instant it had endured, the dying convulsion of the ape that would have torn a lesser man, limb from limb. Part 6. The Thrust of a Knife. Conan stooped and tore the knife from the monster's breast. Then he went swiftly up the stair. What other shapes of fear the darkness held he could not guess, but he had no desire to encounter any more. This touch-and-go sort of battling was too strenuous even for the giant Cimmerian. The moonlight was fading from the floor, the darkness closing in, and something like panic pursued him up the stair. He breathed a gusty sigh of relief when he reached the head, and felt the third key turn in the lock. He opened the door slightly and craned his neck to peer through, half expecting an attack from some human or bestial enemy. He looked into a bare stone corridor, dimly lighted, and a slender, supple figure stood before the door. "Your Majesty!" It was a low, vibrant cry, half in relief and half in fear. The girl sprang to his side, then hesitated as if abashed. "You bleed," she said. "You have been hurt." He brushed aside the implication with an impatient hand. "Scratches that wouldn't hurt a baby. Your skewer came in handy, though. But for it, Tarascus Monkey would be cracking my shin bones for the marrow right now. But what now?" "Follow me," she whispered. "I will lead you outside the city wall. I have a horse concealed there." She turned to lead the way down the corridor, but he laid a heavy hand on her naked shoulder. "Walk beside me," he instructed her softly, passing his massive arm about her lithe waist. "You've played me fair so far, and I'm inclined to believe in you. But I've lived this long only because I've trusted no one too far, man or woman. So, now if you play me false, you won't live to enjoy the jest." She did not flinch at sight of the reddened poniard or the contact of his hard muscles about her supple body. "Cut me down without mercy if I play you false," she answered. "The very feel of your arm about me, even in menace, is as the fulfillment of a dream." The vaulted corridor ended at a door, which she opened. Outside lay another black man, a giant in turban and silk loincloth, with a curved sword lying on the flags near his hand. He did not move. "I drugged his wine," she whispered, swerving to avoid the recumbent figure. "He is the last and outer guard of the pits. None ever escaped from them before, and none has ever wished to seek them. So only these black men guard them. Only these of all the servants knew it was King Conan that Zaltotun brought a prisoner in his chariot. I was watching, sleepless, from an upper casement that opened into the court, while the other girls slept. For I knew that a battle was being fought, or had been fought, in the west. and I feared for you. I saw the blacks carry you up the stair, and I recognized you in the torchlight. I slipped into this wing of the palace tonight, in time to see them carry you to the pits. I had not dared come here before nightfall. You must have lain in drugged senselessness all day in Zaltoten's chamber. Oh, let us be wary. Strange things are afoot in the palace tonight. The slaves said that Zaltoten slept as he often sleeps, drugged by the lotus of Stygia, but Tarascus is in the palace. He entered secretly, through the postern, wrapped in his cloak which was dusty as with long travel, and attended only by his squire, the lean, silent Aridaeus. I cannot understand, but I am afraid. They came out at the foot of a narrow, winding stair, and mounting it, passed through a narrow panel which she slid aside. When they had passed through, she slipped it back in place, and it became merely a portion of the ornate wall. They were in a more spacious corridor, carpeted and tapestried, over which hanging lamps shed a golden glow. Conan listened intently, but he heard no sound throughout the palace. He did not know in what part of the palace he was, or in which direction lay the chamber of Zaltotun. The girl was trembling as she drew him along the corridor, to halt presently beside an alcove masked with satin tapestry. Drawing this aside, she motioned for him to step into the niche, and whispered, "Wait here. Beyond that door at the end of the corridor, we are likely to meet slaves or eunuchs at any time of the day or night. I will go and see if the way is clear, before we essay it." Instantly, his hair-trigger suspicions were aroused. "Are you leading me into a trap?" Tears sprang into her dark eyes. She sank to her knees and seized his muscular hand. "Oh, my king, do not mistrust me now." Her voice shook with desperate urgency. "If you doubt and hesitate, we are lost. Why should I bring you up out of the pits to betray you now?" "All right," he muttered. "I'll trust you, though, by Crom, the habits of a lifetime are not easily put aside. Yet I wouldn't harm you now, if you brought all the swordsmen in Nemedia upon me. But for you, Tarascus's cursed ape would have come upon me in chains and unarmed. Do as you wish, girl." Kissing his hands, she sprang lithely up and ran down the corridor, to vanish through a heavy double door. He glanced after her, wondering if he was a fool to trust her. Then he shrugged his mighty shoulders and pulled the satin hangings together, masking his refuge. It was not strange that a passionate young beauty should be risking her life to aid him. Such things had happened often enough in his life. Many women had looked on him with favor in the days of his wanderings and in the time of his kingship. Yet he did not remain motionless in the alcove, waiting for her return. Following his instincts, he explored the niche for another exit, and presently found one, the opening of a narrow passage masked by the tapestries that ran to an ornately carved door, barely visible in the dim light that filtered in from the outer corridor. And as he stared into it, somewhere beyond that carven door, he heard the sound of another door opening and shutting, and then a low mumble of voices. The familiar sound of one of those voices caused a sinister expression to cross his dark face. Without hesitation, he glided down the passage and crouched like a stalking panther beside the door. It was not locked, and manipulating it delicately, he pushed it open a crack with a reckless disregard for possible consequences that only he could have explained or defended. It was masked on the other side by tapestries, but through a thin slit in the velvet, he looked into a chamber lit by a candle on an ebony table. There were 2 men in that chamber. One was a scarred, sinister-looking ruffian in leather breeks and ragged cloak. The other was Tarascus, king of Nemedia. Tarascus seemed ill at ease. He was slightly pale, and he kept starting and glancing about him as if expecting and fearing to hear some sound or footstep. "Go swiftly and at once," he was saying. "He is deep in drugged slumber, but I know not when he may awaken." "Strange to hear words of fear issuing from the lips of Tarascus," rumbled the other in a harsh, deep voice. The king frowned. "I fear no common man, as you well know. But when I saw the cliffs fall at Valkia, I knew that this devil we had resurrected was no charlatan. I fear his powers, because I do not know the full extent of them, but I know that somehow they are connected with this accursed thing which I have stolen from him. It brought him back to life, so it must be the source of his sorcery. He had it hidden well, but following my secret order, a slave spied on him and saw him place it in a golden chest, and saw where he hid the chest. Even so, I would not have dared steal it had Zaltoten himself not been sunk in lotus slumber. I believe it is the secret of his power. With it, Orastes brought him back to life. With it, he will make us all slaves if we are not wary. So take it and cast it into the sea as I have bidden you. And be sure you are so far from land that neither tide nor storm can wash it up on the beach. You have been paid." "So I have," grunted the ruffian. "And I owe more than gold to you, king. I owe you a debt of gratitude. Even thieves can be grateful." "Whatever debt you may feel you owe me," answered Tarascus, "will be paid when you have hurled this thing into the sea." "I'll ride for Zingara and take ship from Cordova," promised the other. "I dare not show my head in Argos because of the matter of a murder or so." "I care not, so it is done. Here it is. A horse awaits you in the court. Go, and go swiftly." Something passed between them, something that flamed like living fire. Conan had only a brief glimpse of it, and then the ruffian pulled a slouch hat over his eyes, drew his cloak about his shoulder, and hurried from the chamber. And as the door closed behind him, Conan moved with the devastating fury of unchained bloodlust. He had held himself in check so long as he could. The sight of his enemy so near him set his wild blood seething and swept away all caution and restraint. Tarascus was turning toward an inner door when Conan tore aside the hangings and leaped like a blood-mad panther into the room. Tarascus wheeled, but even before he could recognize his attacker, Conan's poniard ripped into him. But the blow was not mortal, as Conan knew the instant he struck. His foot had caught in a fold of the curtains and tripped him as he leaped. The point fleshed itself in Tarascus' shoulder and plowed down along his ribs, and the king of Nemedia screamed. The impact of the blow and Conan's lunging body hurled him back against the table, and it toppled, and the candle went out. They were both carried to the floor by the violence of Conan's rush, and the foot of the tapestry hampered them both in its folds. Conan was stabbing blindly in the dark, Tarascus screaming in a frenzy of panicky terror. As if fear lent him superhuman energy, Tarascus tore free and blundered away in the darkness, shrieking, "Help! Guards! Aridaeus! Orastes! Orastes!" Conan rose, kicking himself free of the tangling tapestries and the broken table, cursing with the bitterness of his bloodthirsty disappointment. He was confused and ignorant of the plan of the palace. The yells of Tarascus were still resounding in the distance, and a wild outcry was bursting forth in answer. The Nemedian had escaped him in the darkness, and Conan did not know which way he had gone. The Cimmerian's rash stroke for vengeance had failed, and there remained only the task of saving his own hide if he could. Swearing luridly, Conan ran back down the passage and into the alcove, glaring out into the lighted corridor, just as Zenobia came running up it, her dark eyes dilated with terror. "Oh, what has happened?" she cried. "The palace is roused. I swear I have not betrayed you." "No, it was I who stirred up this hornet's nest," he grunted. "I tried to pay off a score. What's the shortest way out of this?" She caught his wrist and ran fleetly down the corridor, but before they reached the heavy door at the other end, muffled shouts arose from behind it, and the portals began to shake under an assault from the other side. Zenobia wrung her hands and whimpered. "We are cut off. I locked that door as I returned through it, but they will burst it in a moment. The way to the postern gate lies through it." Conan wheeled. Up the corridor, though still out of sight, he heard a rising clamor that told him his foes were behind as well as before him. "Quick, into this door!" the girl cried desperately, running across the corridor and throwing open the door of a chamber. Conan followed her through, and then through the gold catch behind them. They stood in an ornately furnished chamber, empty but for themselves, and she drew him to a gold-barred window, through which he saw trees and shrubbery. "You are strong," she panted. "If you can tear these bars away, you may yet escape. The garden is full of guards, but the shrubs are thick, and you may avoid them. The southern wall is also the outer wall of the city. Once over that, you have a chance to get away. A horse is hidden for you in a thicket beside the road that runs westward, a few hundred paces to the south of the Fountain of Thrallos. You know where it is?" "Aye, but what of you? I had meant to take you with me." A flood of joy lighted her beautiful face. "Then my cup of happiness is brimming. But I will not hamper your escape. Burdened with me, you would fail. Nay, do not fear for me. They will never suspect that I aided you willingly. Go. What you have just said will glorify my life throughout the long years." He caught her up in his iron arms, crushed her slim, vibrant figure to him, and kissed her fiercely on eyes, cheeks, throat, and lips, until she lay panting in his embrace. Gusty and tempestuous as a storm wind, even his lovemaking was violent. "I'll go," he muttered, "but by Crom, I'll come for you someday." Wheeling, he gripped the gold bars and tore them from their sockets with one tremendous wrench, threw a leg over the sill, and went down swiftly, clinging to the ornaments on the wall. He hit the ground running and melted like a shadow into the maze of towering rose bushes and spreading trees. The one look he cast back over his shoulder showed him Zenobia leaning over the windowsill, her arms stretched after him in mute farewell and renunciation. Guards were running through the garden, all converging toward the palace, where the clamor momentarily grew louder. Tall men in burnished cuirasses and crested helmets of polished bronze. The starlight struck glints from their gleaming armor among the trees, betraying their every movement, but the sound of their coming ran far before them. To Conan, wilderness bred, their rush through the shrubbery was like the blundering stampede of cattle. Some of them passed within a few feet of where he lay, flat in a thick cluster of bushes, and never guessed his presence. With the palace as their goal, they were oblivious to all else about them. When they had gone shouting on, he rose and fled through the garden with no more noise than a panther would have made. So quickly he came to the southern wall and mounted the steps that led to the parapet. The wall was made to keep people out, not in. No sentry patrolling the battlements was in sight. Crouching by an embrasure, he glanced back at the great palace rearing above the cypresses behind him. Lights blazed from every window, and he could see figures flitting back and forth across them like puppets on invisible strings. He grinned hardly, shook his fist in a gesture of farewell and menace, and let himself over the outer rim of the parapet. A low tree, a few yards below the parapet, received Conan's weight as he dropped noiselessly into the branches. An instant later, he was racing through the shadows with the swinging hillman's stride that eats up long miles. Gardens and pleasure villas surrounded the walls of Belvaris. Drowsy slaves, sleeping by their watchmen's pikes, did not see the swift and furtive figure that scaled walls, crossed alleys made by the arching branches of trees, and threaded a noiseless way through orchards and vineyards. Watchdogs woke and lifted their deep booming clamor at a gliding shadow, half-scented, half-sensed, and then it was gone. In a chamber of the palace, Tarascus writhed and cursed on a blood-spattered couch under the deft, quick fingers of Orestes. The palace was thronged with wide-eyed, trembling servitors, but the chamber where the king lay was empty save for himself and the renegade priest. "Are you sure he still sleeps?" Tarascus demanded again, setting his teeth against the bite of the herb juices with which Orestes was bandaging the long, ragged gash in his shoulder and ribs. "Ishtar, Mitra, and Set, that burns like molten pitch of hell, which you would be experiencing even now, but for your good fortune," remarked Orestes. "Whoever wielded that knife struck to kill. Yes, I have told you that Zaltotin still sleeps. Why are you so urgent upon that point? What is he to do with this? You know nothing of what has passed in the palace tonight?" Tarascus searched the priest's countenance with burning intensity. "Nothing. As you know, I have been employed in translating manuscripts for Zaltotun for some months now, transcribing esoteric volumes written in the younger languages into script he can read. He was well versed in all the tongues and scripts of his day, but he has not yet learned all the newer languages, and to save time, he has me translate these works for him, to learn if any new knowledge has been discovered since his time. I did not know that he had returned last night until he sent for me and told me of the battle. Then I returned to my studies, nor did I know that you had returned until the clamor in the palace brought me out of my cell. Then you do not know that Zaltotun brought the king of Aquilonia a captive to this palace?" Orestes shook his head, without particular surprise. "Zaltotin merely said that Conan would oppose us no more. I supposed that he had fallen, but did not ask the details." "Zaltotun saved his life when I would have slain him," snarled Tarascus. "I saw his purpose instantly. He would hold Conan captive to use as a club against us, against Amalric, against Valerius, and against myself. So long as Conan lives, he is a threat, a unifying factor for Aquilonia, that might be used to compel us into courses we would not otherwise follow. I mistrust this undead Pythonian. Of late, I have begun to fear him. I followed him, some hours after he had departed eastward. I wished to learn what he intended doing with Conan. I found that he had imprisoned him in the pits. I intended to see that the barbarian died, in spite of Zaltotun. And I accomplished—" A cautious knock sounded at the door. "That's Aridaeus," grunted Tarascus. "Let him in." The saturnine squire entered, his eyes blazing with suppressed excitement. "How, Aridaeus?" exclaimed Tarascus. "Have you found the man who attacked me?" "You did not see him, my lord?" asked Aridaeus, as one who would assure himself of a fact he already knows to exist. "You did not recognize him?" "Number." It happened so quick, and the candle was out. All I could think of was that it was some devil loosed on me by Zaltotun's magic. The Pythonian sleeps in his barred and bolted room, but I have been in the pits. Aridaeus twitched his lean shoulders excitedly. "Well, speak, man!" exclaimed Tarascus impatiently. "What did you find there?" "An empty dungeon," whispered the squire. "The corpse of the great ape." "What?" Tarascus started upright, and blood gushed from his opened wound. "Aye, the man-eater is dead, stabbed through the heart, and Conan is gone." Tarascus was gray of face as he mechanically allowed Orestes to force him prostrate again, and the priest renewed work upon his mangled flesh. "Conan," he repeated, "not a crushed corpse, escaped. Mitra, he is no man, but a devil himself. I thought Zaltotun was behind this wound. I see now, gods and devils. It was Conan who stabbed me, Aridaeus." "Aye, your majesty. Search every nook in the palace. He may be skulking through the dark corridors now, like a hungry tiger. Let no niche escape your scrutiny, and beware. It is not a civilized man you hunt, but a blood-mad barbarian whose strength and ferocity are those of a wild beast. Scour the palace grounds and the city. Throw a cordon about the walls. If you find he has escaped from the city, as he may well do, take a troop of horsemen and follow him. Once past the walls, it will be like hunting a wolf through the hills. But haste, and you may yet catch him. This is a matter which requires more than ordinary human wits," said Orestes. "Perhaps we should seek Zaltotun's advice." "No!" exclaimed Tarascus violently. "Let the troopers pursue Conan and slay him. Zaltotun can hold no grudge against us if we kill a prisoner to prevent his escape." "Well," said Orestes, "I am no Acheronian, but I am versed in some of the arts and the control of certain spirits which have cloaked themselves in material substance. Perhaps I can aid you in this matter." The fountain of Thrallos stood in a clustered ring of oaks beside the road, a mile from the walls of the city. Its musical tinkle reached Conan's ears through the silence of the starlight. He drank deep of its icy stream, and then hurried southward toward a small, dense thicket he saw there. Rounding it, he saw a great white horse tied among the bushes. Heaving a deep, gusty sigh, he reached it with one stride. A mocking laugh brought him about, glaring. A dully glinting, mail-clad figure moved out of the shadows into the starlight. This was no plumed and burnished palace guardsman. It was a tall man in morion and gray chainmail, one of the adventurers, a class of warriors peculiar to Nemedia, men who had not attained to the wealth and position of knighthood, or had fallen from that estate, hard-bitten fighters, dedicating their lives to war and adventure. They constituted a class of their own, sometimes commanding troops, but themselves accountable to no man but the king. Conan knew that he could have been discovered by no more dangerous a foeman. A quick glance among the shadows convinced him that the man was alone, and he expanded his great chest slightly, digging his toes into the turf as his thews coiled tensely. "I was riding for Belverus on a Malric's business," said the adventurer, advancing warily. The starlight was a long sheen on the great two-handed sword he bore naked in his hand. A horse whinnied to mine from the thicket. I investigated and thought it strange a steed should be tethered here. I waited, and lo, I have caught a rare prize. The adventurers lived by their swords. "I know you," muttered the Nemedian. "You are Conan, king of Aquilonia. I thought I saw you die in the valley of the Valkia, but—" Conan sprang as a dying tiger springs. Practiced fighter though the adventurer was, he did not realize the desperate quickness that lurks in barbaric sinews. He was caught off guard, his heavy sword half lifted. Before he could either strike or parry, the king's poniard sheathed itself in his throat, above the gorget, slanting downward into his heart. With a choked gurgle, he reeled and went down, and Conan ruthlessly tore his blade free as his victim fell. The white horse snorted violently and shied at the sight and scent of blood on the sword. Glaring down at his lifeless enemy, dripping poniard in hand, sweat glistening on his broad breast, Conan poised like a statue, listening intently. In the woods about, There was no sound, save for the sleepy cheep of awakened birds. But in the city, a mile away, he heard the strident blare of a trumpet. Hastily he bent over the fallen man. A few seconds' search convinced him that whatever message the man might have borne was intended to be conveyed by word of mouth. But he did not pause in his task. It was not many hours until dawn. A few minutes later, the white horse was galloping westward along the white road, and the rider wore the gray mail of a Nemedian adventurer. This concludes the third part of 12 total of The Hour of the Dragon, also known as Conan the Conqueror, by Robert E. Howard, produced by Best Audiobooks for free.